My life was like a house of cards, carefully stacked but fragile at the slightest breath. Between the deadlines of my job as a graphic designer and the household chores, my world revolved around Raphael, my 7-year-old son. He was my light amid the shadow that my marriage to Fabrizio had become. I clung to the hope that our family could survive, even with the contempt of Cecilia, my mother-in-law, always looming over us like a storm cloud. That day, everything seemed normal. I made breakfast as always while Fabrizio rushed out for an important meeting. The air was heavy, but it was a routine I had grown used to. With Raphael at school, I immersed myself in work until the clock reminded me it was time to pick him up. I drove there, my mind drifting between layouts and overdue deliveries, never imagining what awaited me. When I arrived, I parked and walked toward the school gate, but something caught my attention before I even got there. A shrill voice echoed in the courtyard, followed by a sharp sound that made my heart race. I quickened my pace, and what I saw made my blood run cold. A woman I had never seen before was gripping Raphael's arm tightly, yelling something I couldn't quite make out. Without thinking, I ran toward them. "Let go of my son now!" My voice came out firm, stronger than I ever thought I was capable of at that moment. The woman looked at me with a mixture of surprise and disdain, but released Raphael, who ran straight into my arms. He was terrified, his eyes filled with tears, and I felt the rage bubbling inside me like lava about to erupt. "Who do you think you are to lay a hand on my son?" I demanded, my voice filled with indignation. The woman, her face carefully made up and carrying an air of superiority, replied with contempt, "I'm the one who's going to put you in your place." Those words hung in the air as I tried to process what had just happened. Who was this woman? Why was she near my son? Before I could demand more answers, she took a step back, adjusted her purse on her shoulder, and walked away without offering any explanation. With my heart pounding, I took Raphael to the car. As he quietly sobbed in the back seat, I promised myself I would find out who she was and what she wanted. That night, while Raphael slept, I started connecting the dots. Fabrizio's absences, his weak excuses, the knowing glances between him and Cecilia. Something was wrong, and now I knew there was a new player in this sick game. The day had started like any other, but as I closed my eyes that night, I realized there was no turning back. That woman, whoever she was, had crossed a line no one had the right to cross. I didn't know where this would lead me, but I was sure of one thing. No one would hurt my son without facing the consequences. Deep down, I felt that the worst was yet to come. The next morning, I could barely breathe, my mind spinning with what had happened. Raphael was still asleep when I opened my laptop at the kitchen table, trying to find any clue about that woman. Her arrogant, cruel image wouldn't leave my mind. Who was she to hurt my son like that? Every second lost felt like an affront to my dignity as a mother. I didn't have to search for long. A quick social media search and a last name whispered by one of the school mothers were enough to find Bianca. Bianca Sales, a personal trainer, young, attractive, and with a smile that suggested she knew how to manipulate anyone she wanted. Every picture of hers displayed the same confident aura I had seen in the school courtyard, but what made my blood freeze was one specific image, her holding hands with Fabrizio. My heart pounded, rage coursing through my veins like a raging river. There he was, the man who had sworn to love me, laughing with her at a restaurant he claimed was only for meetings. Their smiles felt like a direct provocation, a reminder that I was the fool who had believed all his pathetic excuses. I spent the day investigating. Messages on Fabrizio's phone, records of suspicious bank transfers, even the schedules of his so-called business trips. Every detail confirmed what I had already known deep inside. Bianca wasn't just the mistress, she was a threat. And, more than that, she wasn't acting alone. As the pieces fell into place, everything pointed to Cecilia. Hating me seemed to be my mother-in-law's favorite pastime, but now I could see her disdain went further than I had imagined. In one of the messages I managed to access, Cecilia told Bianca, "That woman is weak. We just need to push her a little further and she'll fall for good. Her place is yours." It felt like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just an affair. It was a scheme, a conspiracy to bring me down, to take everything from me, my home, my husband, my dignity. But what hurt the most was realizing they were also willing to use Raphael as a weapon. That night, I looked at my son as he slept, his face peaceful and unaware of the storm forming around us. I knew I couldn't waste time with tears. Fabrizio, Bianca, and Cecilia thought they had control, that I was just a fragile woman trapped in the web they had created. They were wrong. If they wanted a battle, they would get one. But it would be on my terms, my way. In the silence of the night, I devised my first plan. I didn't know how it would end, but I was certain that when it was over, they would never forget the woman they had underestimated. The silence between us was deafening. Fabrizio sat on the couch, staring at his phone as if the world around him didn't exist. I took a deep breath, trying to control the avalanche of emotions boiling inside me, and went straight to the point. "Who is Bianca?" I asked, my voice firm despite the storm raging in my chest. He slowly lifted his eyes, pretending to be confused. "Bianca who?" It was no surprise that he denied it. I expected that. I picked up my phone, opened the photos I had saved, and showed him the image of him and Bianca holding hands at the restaurant. Fabrizio blinked a few times, and for a brief moment I saw the confident mask he wore crack. "Are you spying on me now?" he shot back, his voice cold but laced with irritation. "This is nothing. She's just a colleague who hits your son." My question cut through the air like a blade, and the silence that followed was heavy. Fabrizio laughed, a dry, incredulous sound, and stood up, pacing the room like he was dealing with a stubborn child. "You're overreacting, Livia. Bianca is just someone I talk to. You should stop making up stories in your head and be stronger. That's what our family needs." His words hit me like stones. Stronger? After everything? I looked at him, and in that moment, I realized there was nothing left to save. Fabrizio wasn't just a cheater. He was a man who had chosen to trample over everything we had built together. My breathing was heavy, and before I could say anything, the living room door swung open. Bianca walked in without hesitation, as if she owned the house. She wore a tight dress and a smug smile that made my blood boil. "You didn't have to be so hard on her, Fabrizio. It's not her fault she's limited." Bianca chuckled softly, as if my pain were some private joke between them. "Get out of my house!" I shouted, my voice trembling with rage. But Bianca didn't even flinch. She sat down in one of the armchairs, crossed her legs, and looked at me like she was observing a caged animal. "I just came to tell you that Raphael will be fine with me. I know how to take care of him, and unlike you, I won't raise a weak child." Her words hit me like a slap. I wanted to lunge at her, scream, do anything to wipe that smile off her face, but Fabrizio stepped in, placing a hand on her shoulder and looking at me with disdain. "You're embarrassing yourself, Livia. Accept reality. We've moved on. You should do the same." I felt the sting of tears burning my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. They thought they had won, that I was weak, a shadow of the woman I used to be. But at that moment, as I held on to my anger like armor, I made a silent promise. No one, not Fabrizio, not Bianca, not Cecilia, would take away what mattered most to me. I would walk out of that house with my head held high, but not as a defeated woman. I would leave because I was about to start something they would never forget. As the door closed behind me, I swore to myself that every word they had spoken would be paid back with interest. They had laughed at me for the last time. After that night, something inside me changed. It was no longer pain, no longer rage. It was something cold, methodical, almost calculated. There was no room for mistakes. They had underestimated me, and now it was my turn to use that against them. I started with the basics: evidence. Fabrizio was anything but discreet. His phone was filled with messages from Bianca, some so explicit they made my stomach turn. I installed a spy app that gave me access to everything: conversations, schedules, even real-time location. In less than a week, I knew more about their routine than they did. The cameras were the next step. I placed a few around the house, hidden in strategic spots. Raphael's room was my priority, but I also installed one in Fabrizio's office, where he thought he had privacy. That was where he made his most suspicious calls. The first recording I got was a conversation between him and Cecilia, where she said, "You need to do this quickly, Fabrizio. That woman is holding on more than I expected. But don't worry, Bianca knows how to push her where it hurts." Push me where it hurts? They thought they had that power, but all they had done was ignite a fire they would never be able to put out. Recovering bank transfers was a bit more complicated. I used a contact at the bank, someone who owed my father a favor. The copies of the deposits Fabrizio had made into Bianca's account came with dates and amounts. The total was enough to buy a luxury car, and all of it was on my dime. As I built my arsenal, I also took care of myself. I started running every morning, something I hadn't done in years. At first, it felt impossible, but with every mile I covered, I felt my body and mind grow stronger. I changed my wardrobe to pieces that made me feel confident, started wearing makeup again, not for them, but for me. It was an invisible armor, a reminder that I was in control. I also reinvested in my work. I took on more projects, worked late into the night, and for the first time in months, Raphael seemed at peace. He was the reason for all of this. Every piece of evidence I gathered, every step I took, was for him. It was on a rainy afternoon that I made my final decision. I looked at everything I had in my hands: messages, recordings, bank statements. It was all there, enough to take down Fabrizio, Bianca, and Cecilia in one blow. It wouldn't be quick or simple, but it would be devastating. I planned the perfect moment, one they would never forget. When I put the final piece in place, I smiled for the first time in weeks. They had no idea that every move they made had led them straight into the trap I had built for them. The war had only just begun, and I had no intention of losing. As I watched the rain pour outside my window, I imagined their faces when they realized they had underestimated the wrong person. And so, with the storm outside as my witness, I finalized my plan. They thought I was weak, but now they would understand that no one messes with a mother who has something to protect. Night fell heavy with tension. Cecilia had insisted that I attend a dinner at her house, an apparently casual event with family and friends. Her voice on the phone had been sweet and syrupy, a thin veil over her true intentions. I knew exactly what she was planning, to humiliate me in front of everyone, as she always did. But this time, things would be different. She had no idea what I had prepared. I arrived wearing a dress I had recently bought, something simple, but that made me feel confident. Fabrizio was already there, probably since early that afternoon. He barely looked at me when I walked in. Bianca was seated in the corner of the room, close to Cecilia, both of them laughing and whispering like they were sharing some inside joke. It was almost comical how much they underestimated my presence. Dinner started with meaningless chatter. Cecilia worked hard to keep the attention on herself, slipping in venomous remarks disguised as jokes. "Livia, dear, you seem so busy lately. It must be hard to manage everything on your own, isn't it?" The muffled laughter around the table was brief, but I could sense the discomfort. I swallowed the comment with a fake smile, knowing my moment was coming. I waited for the perfect time. The dinner went on, plates came and went, and I observed every detail, feeling the weight of their eyes trying to measure my reaction. When Everyone was relaxed, a little too much wine softening their senses. I stood up calmly, drawing all attention to myself. I have something important to share with you all. My voice was firm, and immediately, silence filled the room. Cecilia raised an eyebrow, intrigued, while Fabrizio shifted uncomfortably. These past few months, I've been going through things none of you could imagine, and today I think it's time to lay everything out in the open. I reached into my bag and pulled out the remote control I had brought. I pressed the button. On the large screen that Cecilia used to display travel pictures, the messages began to appear. First, the text exchanges between Fabrizio and Bianca. Shared laughter, comments about secret meetings, and finally, images that left no doubt about their affair. The expressions around the table changed instantly. Some guests widened their eyes in shock. Others tried to pretend they weren't seeing. Fabrizio shot up from his seat, trying to interrupt, but I continued. I'm not done yet. The next display was the bank transfers, exorbitant amounts deposited into Bianca's account. His name was right there, clear as day. Bianca stuttered, trying to form a sentence, but I turned my attention to Cecilia. And you, Cecilia, you really thought you'd be left out? These messages show exactly how you helped orchestrate all of this. The screen filled with conversations between her and Bianca, full of instructions and insults directed at me, making her role in the scheme undeniable. You said I was weak, that my place was hers. Well, now everyone here knows exactly who you are. The room was suffocated in silence, the kind that lingers and makes it hard to breathe. Fabrizio tried to regain control, but it was too late. Livia, this is absurd. You're twisting everything. Twisting? I asked, turning to him. You cheated on me, used our money to fund your mistress, and even tried to destroy my life with your mother's help. If that's not betrayal in every possible form, I don't know what is. Cecilia, pale and speechless, scanned the room for support but found none. Bianca grabbed her purse, muttering something incoherent before rushing out. Fabrizio remained frozen in place, unable to react. When I finished, I took a deep breath. My heart was pounding, but a sense of relief washed over me. I picked up my bag and walked toward the door, but not before turning back to say, You thought I was weak, but you underestimated the wrong person. Good luck picking up the pieces. I walked out of that house with my head held high, feeling the weight of their stares on my back. I knew that night marked the beginning of the end for them, but for me, it was the start of something much bigger. The morning after the dinner, the weight I had carried for so long finally seemed to start lifting. Still, I knew the battle wasn't completely over. The dinner had been a precise strike, but the wounds they inflicted on Raphael and me wouldn't disappear so easily. My son was still my priority, and I had to ensure that nothing and no one would try to harm us again. Fabrizio was the first to feel the effects of what had happened. Early in the morning, I received a message from one of his former business partners, someone I barely knew, but who seemed to be following the aftermath. Looks like your ex-husband is out of the game, the message read. He's lost important contracts since the story came to light. I felt a bitter satisfaction as I read those words. Fabrizio had always prided himself on his image as an honorable and successful businessman, but now he was just another man ruined by his own choices. As for Bianca, the rumors spread like wildfire. She disappeared for a few days, probably to avoid public humiliation, but when she resurfaced, she was a shadow of what she once was. A friend of mine who went to the same gym told me that Bianca had lost most of her clients. No one wants to be associated with a homewrecker, my friend said with a touch of irony. I didn't have to lift a finger for her to face the consequences. Cecilia, the so-called untouchable matriarch, was the one who surprised me the most. Always so proud, she now seemed to shrink under the mockery of the friends she once cherished. One of them, an elderly gentleman she used to host for weekly tea, called me to apologize. I never imagined she was capable of something like this. I'm sorry for what you went through." His sincerity caught me off guard. It was strange to realize that, amid the chaos, there were still people who could recognize the truth. But, while they faced their downfall, I couldn't afford to be complacent. Life had to go on, and Raphael needed me more than ever. In the following weeks, I reorganized everything. I found a good lawyer who helped expedite the divorce process, ensuring that Fabrizio no longer had control over our home or finances. He tried to argue, but there was no way to undo what had already been decided. With things settling down, I knew it was time to start over. I looked at Raphael, playing on the living room rug, and felt a mix of sadness and hope. He was still healing, but little by little he was returning to his cheerful and curious self. I had promised him that everything would be okay, and this time it wasn't an empty promise. At the end of the day, when the house was finally quiet, I sat on the couch and closed my eyes. I thought about everything I had been through and how I had made it this far. My strength wasn't something they had given me. It was something that had risen from the ashes of what they tried to destroy. There was still much to do, but now it was different. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control, that the future was in my hands, and in that moment, I knew it was time to plan the next step, the fresh start that Raphael and I deserved. After months of turmoil, I finally took a deep breath in a place I could now call home. Our new apartment was simple, but filled with light and life. I decorated it carefully, choosing colors and objects that reflected the peace Raphael and I had fought so hard for. Every detail was a symbol of what we had overcome, and every corner was a promise of a new beginning. My design studio, another dream I had finally found the courage to pursue, started small but grew faster than I had imagined. I built a client base that valued my work, and best of all, I worked on my own terms right beside my son. Raphael often sat next to me, drawing while I created, and his smile became my daily fuel. He had returned to being the curious and joyful child he had always been, and seeing that reassured me that I had made the right choice. Fabrizio, on the other hand, was facing the full weight of his decisions. With his reputation shattered, he lost his position in the company and was pushed aside by his own business partners. He tried to reach out a few times, but I had nothing left to say. Our interactions were strictly limited to his visitation with Raphael, something I made sure to monitor closely. He had lost control over my life, and that was something he would never get back. Bianca had disappeared completely. Someone mentioned that she had moved to another city, but not without leaving behind the wreckage of her downfall. Her social media, once filled with displays of luxury and confidence, had been abandoned, a mere echo of the person she had tried to be. I didn't need any more news about her. To me, Bianca was nothing more than a shadow of the past. As for Cecilia, her humiliation was perhaps the most public of all. The influential friends she had so desperately clung to severed ties, and the social events she once hosted fell into oblivion. The last time I saw her was at a local market, avoiding my gaze. She looked smaller, almost unrecognizable. For a brief moment, I considered approaching her, but I decided against it. There was nothing left for me to say. As time passed, I realized that my story was not just about revenge or justice. It was about finding my strength and learning to be happy on my own terms. I had lost a lot, but what I gained was incomparable: freedom, peace, and the certainty that Raphael and I were on the right path. One sunny afternoon, I sat on a park bench as Raphael ran across the grass, playing with other children. His laughter echoed in the air, the most beautiful sound I could hear. I watched him, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. Life had not always been fair, but at that moment, I knew we had won. The future was ours, and no one could take it away from us. I smiled at the sky, breathing deeply, and thought about everything I had endured. It hadn't been easy, but the biggest lesson I had learned was clear. No one destroys a mother who fights for her child. And now it was our time to bloom.